All right, guys, thank you for joining session 4. I did have to pre-record this session because I will be going on maternity leave any day now. I'm not really sure how long this is going to go, so it may be a little bit shorter than the previous 3 sessions, but of course, feel free to watch this and send questions my way. If you don't get an out of office notice, I will still try to answer as best I can. So let's dive in. Our objectives for today are to talk through the crucial roles of motivation and discipline when it comes to exercise plans, and to explain how one is more effective than the other. On the contrary, we're going to talk about training flexibility. So what happens when you can't or don't exercise according to your plan? We'll move on from there to discussing training longevity. So this is a lifelong thing, as we've discussed. Exercise is not a quick fix. It truly is a health obligation. And so we want to encourage you guys to have that flexibility and respect your own lifestyle, but at the same time, continue training throughout your whole life. And lastly, we're going to touch on training progression. So once you hit a goal, where do you go from there? Or how do you continually challenge yourself and increase strength, fitness, and overall health as you age? So as we start to break down, our bodies start to break down, how do you continue to challenge yourself appropriately throughout life? And I will be referencing some notes here. So if you see me looking in a different direction, that's because I am referencing those notes. So next slide here. I can check this. So motivation versus discipline. Both of them are crucial, as I mentioned in that objectives overview. At some point, we've all experienced a time in our lives when we felt empowered, inspired, or motivated to change our lifestyle. And maybe you're watching this right now because you've decided to make a change, or you've started deciding to engage further in your health. So maybe you've already been exercising and you just want to take it to the next level. Whatever your reason is, great. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad that Peyton and I had the opportunity to present these topics to you. So let's talk about the types of motivation and how to leverage them to achieve your goals and ideals. There's extrinsic motivation. So extrinsic motivation, you are motivated to perform an activity so that you can earn a reward or avoid a punishment. Some examples of this, of a reward, could be feeling confident, fitting into a certain item of clothing, winning an event or a race, things like that. Punishments could be heart disease or other chronic illnesses. Maybe you don't want to let a team down, or even just perceived failure that has a big impact on our life as well. So those rewards and punishments are parts of extrinsic motivation. So external factors impacting the way that we behave. With that being said, extrinsic motivation can certainly be helpful. I know from my life examples, I was an athlete in high school and college, and I was highly motivated to race well. I had a financial incentive to race well. I wanted to race well for my own confidence, things like that. I wanted to avoid letting my team down, so that would have been that avoidance of punishment. And after college, I went through a phase where I truly did struggle to stay motivated because I had lost almost every extrinsic motivating factor that I had previously leveraged. So that leads me to the explanation and the importance of intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation means that you're motivated to perform an activity for its own sake and for the personal rewards that you gain from that activity. So you're doing this activity specifically because you enjoy it, whether you just enjoy the benefits of that activity, you find it fun, or because you like the challenge. It doesn't necessarily matter, but both extrinsic and motivation can be beneficial. So which is best when it comes to exercise plans? Both of them definitely have a role. So extrinsic can help you try or encourage you to learn something new, or it can provide feedback so that you can learn that your performance is worth your time. Intrinsic motivation, however, tends to lead toward longevity and repetition, so less burnout. You're more likely to continue on that activity or continue performing that activity for a longer period of time if you find that motivation intrinsically. Also, interesting to note, when I was looking into the differences between extrinsic and intrinsic motivation, studies have shown that exercise motivation can actually be partially genetic. So the study that I'm referencing here is researchers bred mice based on their desire to run on an exercise wheel. And after several generations of breeding, the selected mice, the selectively bred mice, voluntarily ran farther on those exercise wheels, and they had bigger brains than the control group. And that's not to say that people who exercise have bigger brains by any means, but the researchers suggested that the part of the brain that grew was the part that controlled motivation and processes dopamine, so that reward or that feel good hormone. On the contrary to that, those mice were also agitated when they were denied exercise. Some of you guys are probably like that. I know that definitely applies to me in my life, but some of you guys are probably like, man, I wish I had that genetic motivation to exercise. One big key factor that I want to emphasize here is that genetics are definitely not an excuse to play the victim card and avoid exercise. So this is where discipline comes in. This is probably one of the biggest things that I try and coach people with, is just understanding the difference between inspiration or motivation versus discipline. Every time, guys, discipline is going to outperform motivation. So when your mindset goes from, I want to do this or I have to do this, to this is what I do. I do this. I am a person who exercises. I am a person who takes care of my health. That's discipline. And so, as I've mentioned in the session 2, the previous session that I presented, our bodies are made to move. So all of us, this is something that we do. This is a part of our identity. We are identified as people who move. That's what we need to do. And then just lastly, to touch on, motivation versus discipline. One interesting quote that I found was that with just motivation and no discipline, there's no sustainability. So if we truly want to make this a lifestyle habit, and something that we've built into our lifestyle, we do have to have discipline. We do have to make a conscious decision to participate in an activity or engage in our health. One other thing, I am at home today, and so if there's a cat who walks across the screen, I apologize for that in advance. Hopefully I can avoid that situation though. Moving on. So training flexibility. So with flexibility, the biggest thing I want to emphasize is that this is not referring to stretching or yoga. However, those things are very important. But training flexibility is more so about life happening to us. So the point of exercise and training in general is to help you live your life, right? Don't stress out over skipping a workout or missing a workout for whatever reason. Maybe you have to take somebody to the doctor or, go see a kid's baseball game or something like that. Don't stress out about those things, because the point of exercise and training is to help you achieve more life and gain more life. And those are things that happen in your life. So just, key things to keep in mind there. But a question that I do get pretty often is, well, how fast do you lose that progress that you've made? So that depends, and that's a really good question. If you've just started getting into shape, so if you're a beginner in a program, most adaptations on a muscular and cellular level have not solidified yet. So suddenly stopping exercise, you're going to be back to square one pretty quickly. Now, if you've been exercising regularly for a long time, sorry, hold on 1 second here. The laptop is warm, so my cat decided to try and lean on it. My apologies. If you've been exercising regularly for a long time and then you stop suddenly, research shows that you're going to start losing endurance after about 3 weeks, and a pretty significant amount of it, but you can gain that back more quickly than when you had just started, if that makes sense. The reason for that is because when you are endurance training, so let's say you've been running for a long time, training for a long distance race, something like that, your body has to ramp up the red blood cell production. And so when there's no longer a stimulus for creating those red blood cells, you're going to start losing some of the body's stimulus for creating those red blood cells. So it's kind of just on an as needed basis. With strength training, those declines actually kind of, I would say, are less steep to a certain point. So research has shown that you only lose about 6% of muscle density after 3 weeks, which is a huge contrast to losing minutes off of a 5K time after 3 weeks when you're training for an endurance event. With that being said, losing about 6% of muscle density after 3 weeks, the decline after that is actually pretty steep, just because you're not going to lose muscle cells quickly or really ever, but the density of those muscle cells can change fairly quickly after about 3 weeks. So the key takeaway here is just that taking an extra day off because you needed to go to an appointment will have very little effect, if any at all, on your long-term progress. Just try and get back into your routine as soon as possible. Things happen. Maybe you fall off for 3 weeks. Maybe you've fallen off for 6 months and that's why you're here. Something like that. Jump back into the routine that you enjoy as soon as possible. That's all I have to say about that. As far as flexibility goes, though, what about when you don't feel like doing your normal routine? I think the biggest thing to assess there is why not? If it's, you had a really stressful day, you were planning on working out today, today being Thursday, for instance, if I was planning on working out and then I just didn't feel like it because I had a stressful day or something like that, that's fine. I can do something else today and get back to my plan tomorrow, right? But if this is a regular occurrence, so let's say you had a normal day at work, you had a pretty easygoing morning, something like that. I feel like most parents are gonna kind of laugh at the thought of an easygoing morning, but let's assess on whether or not we need to make a change to your overall goal or plan if this is a regular occurrence where you're dreading your workouts and things like that. So training flexibility can be kind of a spectrum, do what you can when you can. But if there's a regular hindrance or a regular demotivator, let's assess that and maybe try and, update your goals or update your plan so that you can continue moving forward and continue with that training longevity. Speaking of which, so consistency is the key here. So longevity, particularly meaning lifestyle, this is your life, becoming a lifelong exerciser. Peyton and I always communicate that we don't believe in quick fixes or the diet mindset, or how fast can I drop 20 pounds, things like that. We do not operate that way. Both of us coach pretty similarly in that regard. And so again, just emphasizing, this is a lifestyle, this is your life. And I also want to point out that really becoming a lifelong exerciser has less to do with access to a gym or money, or perfect health. And it has more to do with factors that you can actually control. So some of these factors are listed here on the screen today. as we mentioned in session 2, so big impactor of training longevity and consistency is to schedule your workouts. As you guys all know, communication is key in pretty much everything that you do. And so if you need to schedule your workouts on your work calendar, I would probably not suggest sharing that with other people. But if you have a workout buddy or something like that who's going to be joining you, schedule it with them. Put it on their calendar too. Maybe you're just putting it on your calendar at home. Hey, this is when I'm going to Orange Theory. I'm going to this class on this day, something like that as an example. Schedule your workouts because that helps with consistency every time without fail. Second thing is to create a support network, whether that is you asking a coworker to join you in the gym, or it's your Apple Watch that reminds you to get up and walk, something like that. If that Apple Watch is what motivates you, that's your support network, that's great. Anything that you can utilize or leverage to have support and accountability is going to be a huge factor in your consistency and your training longevity. Number 3 is to push yourself. So studies have shown that a more challenging workout that would include interval training or varied rates of exertion actually do, after the workout, give people more enjoyment. I think we can all relate during the workout when it's difficult, it's not necessarily something that you enjoy. But after the fact, when you know, hey, I just challenged myself, I pushed myself to the limit, we've all been there at some point, I can guarantee it, and you feel good. You feel proud of yourself, you feel accomplished for the day, things like that. So don't be afraid to push yourself. Don't just get on the elliptical for 30 minutes every single day, right? If that's not challenging you, at a certain point, let's switch it up. Do some variable workouts, do some interval training, things like that. Another thing listed on here, number 4, is, as we mentioned last week, sometimes you just got to get creative. You got to think outside the box. Whether you have 10 minutes on any given day or you have 30 minutes, it doesn't necessarily matter. Get creative with that 10 minutes. Get creative with that 30 minutes. Utilize the time that you have available to you. It doesn't matter. Don't discredit the amount of time that you have, and leverage that. This could be, on a weekend, maybe you don't feel like driving to the gym. Okay. Is there an opportunity for you to go kayak? Is there an opportunity for you to do stand-up paddleboarding or snowshoeing or something like that? Again, think outside the box here, get creative, do things that you enjoy, and you're going to continue doing them throughout your life. Excuse me. So number 5, if you want to continue doing things throughout your life, you have to protect your body. So paying attention to your nutrition is the number 1 thing that I want to push there. But also, as I just briefly touched on, doing yoga or stretching, simply stretching several times a week, that's going to help you reduce injuries. Another thing we touched on in session 2 was that most elderly people who are beginning to lose their independence, it has less to do with the fact that they have overuse injuries. And typically it has more to do with the fact that they did not use their muscles and joints appropriately throughout their life. They didn't challenge themselves, they didn't stretch, they didn't work out, things like that. And they start to lose independence because of that. So again, just promoting strength training, resistance training, and cardiovascular and balance training, especially if your primary goal is to maintain your independence throughout your life. Number 6, as we've talked through in a couple of previous slides, try and develop that intrinsic motivation to exercise. And I'm going to tell you this right off the bat, that's not something that typically naturally comes quickly. You have to be able to tune into how you feel after your workouts. You have to be able to pay attention to how you feel throughout the day. Maybe you're noticing you have more energy after you work out in the morning, or something like that. But develop that intrinsic motivation. Find joy in little things like exercise, and that's going to help you continue this throughout the rest of your life as well. And then lastly, and maybe most importantly, I don't know if you can really rank these on an importance scale, but just know that exercise is an investment. Personally, I'm a little biased here, but I would argue that this is the best retirement investment that you can make, because realistically, you know, we could all have the best nest egg in the entire world. But if you don't take care of your health, you're going to get to the end of your career. You're going to, you know, get to the end of your life and think, oh, well, now I don't have my independence. Maybe I should have taken better care of my body. And that's not to scare anybody, but I hope that motivates you and inspires you to start making changes right now, whether you're 20 or you're, you know, 65 and getting ready to retire. I hope you guys are placing an emphasis on that retirement investment as well. So moving on to our last slide here, our last informational slide, I should say, training progression. This is another one of the biggest questions that I get, one of my more frequently asked questions as a personal trainer or coach. How do you know when you're ready to progress? And then more importantly, how do you progress towards your goals? So of course, caveat here, this totally depends on your goal, but a general concept would be progressive overload. So that sounds like a big scary word. Progressive overload is just making your training harder over time. So with exercise training, the stimulus has to disrupt the homeostasis of the body to some extent. So the balance of the body, breakdown versus buildup of the body, if you want to put it that way, to some extent, in order to cause adaptations of any form. So if we're always providing the exact same stimulus, we won't necessarily continue to adapt or improve. An example of this would be if you're curling 15-pound dumbbells, 3 sets of 10 reps for 15 weeks. Okay. At some point, that's not going to be difficult, and your body's not going to necessarily benefit from that exercise as much as it did at the beginning of that program. So to kind of break this down a little bit further, and I'm going to kind of focus a little bit more on resistance training programs specifically right now, but you guys do need to understand that strength and hypertrophy, or strength versus muscle growth, are 2 different goals, but they can go hand in hand. So strength, as noted on the slide, strength is maximizing how much load that we can lift. Lift off the ground, lift over our bodies, whatever it may be. Hypertrophy is muscle size growth. So this generally comes from an increase in the number of muscle cells, or myofibrils. If you think about it, these, like I said, can go hand in hand. A bigger muscle means that you have more contractile tissue to be able to produce force. Strength, though, also has a larger component of neural adaptations. So motor coordination, improved lifting techniques, things like that. So our nervous system can help us produce more force. Those kinds of things have to do more so with strength goals than muscle size goals, if that makes sense. So for hypertrophy specifically, so for muscle size growth, there's not really any mandatory exercises for that. And by mandatory exercises, I mean just do whatever exercises that you enjoy that target the muscle groups that you are hoping to grow. For instance, easy example of this, you want to grow your biceps. Okay, you're going to need to do bicep curls or something that is pull-ups, something that is going to challenge your biceps specifically. For strength, there are, we're going to call them mandatory exercises. There are specific exercises that you'll have to do if you want to improve them. Easy example of this one, if you want to be able to pick up 200 pounds off the ground, you need to do deadlifts. You need to be able to train by picking things up off the ground. I think that's pretty intuitive, but I feel like it's necessary to say that. Going back to hypertrophy or muscle growth goals. For rep ranges and weights, when it comes to building muscle, pretty much anything in like the 6 to 25 rep range, of course, accounting for an appropriate amount of sets. So 2 to 5 sets between 6 and 25 reps will suffice. You want to choose your weights based on the last rep of each set being at or near failure. What that feels like is, for instance, in a squat, you go down into a squat position. At that final rep, you should feel like, oh no, I don't know if I can actually finish this rep. I might need to drop the bar off my back, something like that. So again, focusing on 2 to 5 sets of approximately 6 to 25 reps is going to get you towards your goal. Just try and be consistent with the number of sets, number of reps, and things like that. And if you need to increase the number of reps or increase your weight used during those reps, you can do so whenever you feel it's appropriate. But if your goal, like I said, is just to continue to build muscle, to build size and density of that muscle, that rep range is going to be just fine for you. One other thing with muscle size growth is that in general, more sets are going to help you build muscle faster. So in that thread of thought, 10 sets of however many reps is going to help you build muscle faster than 3 sets of however many reps. Kind of makes sense, right? Increasing that volume is going to increase the stimulus for breaking down that muscle and building it back up. However, that's a bell curve as well, as with pretty much everything in exercise. So along that bell curve, at a certain number of sets or a certain volume range, if you want to call it that, for exercise, you're going to be, there's a greater cost benefit analysis. So at a certain point, you're more likely to just get injured and not be able to recover in time for your next workout. So be smart about that. I would not recommend really more than 5 sets with any kind of exercise goal. But you guys know your bodies better than I do, so plan accordingly. On the contrary, for strength training specifically, your goals do need to change with that as far as rep ranges go. So rep ranges and weights for strength training need to be lower. So typically, if you're hoping to gain strength, you want to train with a higher weight and do lower numbers of reps. So I'm talking between 1 and 5 reps, which does not seem like a lot, but we can talk about that in a second, and use higher weights. Okay, so the volume or the number of sets in this case is not as important when it comes to wanting to build strength. Generally speaking, for strength building, you want to set your program to be between 1 and 5 sets of 1 to 5 reps. That's just the general recommendation for strength training. If you guys have any questions on hypertrophy or strength goals specifically, please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to explain why those things are set there, but don't want to spend too much time on that. Just kind of wanted to give you guys the resources and the numbers for that. So for building endurance, a lot of you guys, as I've talked about, are training for 5Ks or even marathons, things like that. It is beneficial when you're building endurance to alternate your long training days and your short training days. Those short training days should be more intense. And over time, you want to increase the volume of your training. So volume could mean either more mileage or time spent moving. So increasing from a 30-minute workout to a 60-minute workout, or of course, the number of times per day that you're training. With endurance training, I can't really get too into the weeds right now, just because endurance goals are all very specific. And like I said, some of you guys are training for 5Ks, some of you guys are training for marathons. those are incredibly different training programs, as you can imagine. So for that, that's a more specific thing. On that note, you guys all know that there are tons and tons of programs on the internet to help you achieve any training goal. Pick one, stick with it, and you're likely to show progress. Not everything on the internet is true. Of course, we are more and more aware of that every single day. But I think the biggest hindrance that I've seen as a coach, as far as training progression goes, is when people just jump from plan to plan. They see something more enticing, they see something more appealing to them, and they just jump from plan to plan, and they end up contradicting any progress that they've made. So, you know, as I've mentioned in the previous session as well, don't overthink, just move, especially as a beginner, just do something. But pick a plan, stick with it, and you're likely to see progress. So with that being said, that concludes my formal presentation. If you guys do have any questions, feel free to reach out via email or phone. I will be available as long as I can be, and hopefully that's not too much longer for my sake, but hope you guys found a lot of value in the Nourished and Fit series. I think Peyton and I would like to pick this up maybe when I return, or maybe in the next upcoming year. So your feedback is super important to us. If you can let us know what you found valuable, what else you would like to know through these sessions, that would be fantastic. So on that note, I am going to close out of here, and I hope you guys have a great weekend.